Next, let's look at the French colonies in North America. New France, as it was called. The French were exploring North America in the 1500s. However, that religious division that we were just talking about, religious civil wars in France, delayed colonization efforts. It's kind of hard to send out colonizing missions, large naval fleets of colonists to go settle somewhere on the other side of the world when your country is divided by religious issues and really split between Catholics and Protestants. So the French don't really begin colonizing North America until 1600. And when they do colonize, compared to the English, it is in much smaller numbers, a lot fewer people. And what that means is that French colonists, much more so than the English, who we'll spend most of our time talking about, the French colonists are really going to need that support of Native Americans. They're really going to rely on having alliances and friendly relationships with most of the Native Americans in the New World that they encounter. And the French are going to settle in a very different way than the English, which we'll talk about later. The French are going to build a lot fewer farms. And they're going to build mostly trading posts. And they're going to do a lot of their settlement along the St. Lawrence River, or in areas that feed into the St. Lawrence River. The lightly shaded areas on this map are all the lands where you can travel by water, either down a stream or river or from one of the Great Lakes to the St. Lawrence River and eventually make it out to the Atlantic Ocean. This is going to be the area where the French are settling, and I'm using air quotes for that, and where they're going to be trading with Native Americans. The areas where they do build a few farms, the areas where they do build their trading posts are quite often on land not occupied by Indians. And as a result, there's not that initial hostility that we'll see with groups like the English or even the Spanish. Another reason for the difference in relationships between the French and Native Americans as opposed to other European powers and their relationships, is that the French were willing to mediate between local tribes. With the influx of Europeans, it might offset the balance of resources or land or hunting grounds or whatever and create some conflicts that maybe hadn't been present before. Conflicts between different Native American groups. The Europeans called them tribes. The French were willing to help mediate these conflicts, act as kind of an impartial outside observer and try to find a solution that both sides could compromise with. The English do not do this. This is something that gives the French a good deal of authority and goodwill with Native American groups, and the English missed out on this. They weren't willing to put themselves in between tribes that were in conflict with each other. Another reason for the different relationships has to do with the type of people coming to New France. It's almost exclusively male French colonists coming to New France. And those male colonists eventually are going to look for wives, and many of them intermarried into Native American groups, into Native American society. And what that leads to is a real exchange of culture. There's an exchange of language. There's an exchange of customs. And when you exchange culture with people, it leads to a stronger bond. This is why in 1763, there will be a conflict known as the French and Indian Alliance. The British had Indian allies, but the French had stronger, more substantial, and more significant alliances with Native Americans, in part because of that bond built up through shared culture as a result of frequent intermarriage between French male colonists and Native American women. This bond is going to last until 1763, despite the fact that there were more English settlers in the New World than French. In terms of chronology, the English are settling in Jamestown right about the same time that the French are building trading posts along the St. Lawrence River. So right about the same time that the French are going to start setting up those trading posts in Canada, it's right about the early 1600s, right about when the English are going to set up Jamestown down in Virginia. Which Native Americans did they ally with mostly? Mostly the French are going to ally with the Algonquin group of Native Americans. That's a language group. There would be probably hundreds of tribes that would fall into that language group designation, and they mainly lived in those areas shaded red on this map. The British, on the other hand, are going to ally mostly with the Iroquois Confederacy. That's that light green area in between mainly the 13 British colonies and most of Canada. As a result, the Iroquois are going to be put in this situation where they're kind of a buffer between the French and the English. One of our maxims, one of the things that is almost always true in American history that we're going to learn is that if the British are fighting a war before World War I, it's probably with the French. So this is a difficult situation for the Iroquois to be in because there is an intense rivalry and conflict between the British and the French in Europe and extended to the New World. How was New France ruled? Well, New France was originally ruled by a trading company headed by Samuel de Champlain. This is similar to the East India Trading Company in India that you learned about last year in World Studies. For an analogy, imagine if Walmart was given the right and the authority to colonize Mars. And then Walmart is the first human settlers on Mars, and they control the government. They obviously control the economy. They control transportation to and from. They control trade. They would control all aspects of life on Mars. That's what Champlain's trading company had from the beginning in Canada. Eventually, the Crown will seize control, but early on, Samuel de Champlain's trading company controls Canada, French Canada. And the trading company makes an important rule. The Catholics win those French religious conflicts we were talking about. Throughout the 1500s, French Protestants and French Catholics were in conflict, in war with each other over who would control the future of France. The Catholics win, and as a result of the Catholics being in power, they make a rule that only French Catholics can move to and settle in New France. One, that means no foreigners, only French settlers. And the ban on French Protestants means that the Huguenots, a sect of French Protestants who were common in southeastern France, along with the western coast of France, and happened to be excellent sailors, do not go to the New World. This is one of the reasons why the British will continue to have naval superiority, not just in the European theater, but in the New World as well. French Jesuit missionaries, they're Catholics, are going to go to New France to try to convert Indians because they really believed, and the French government believed, and the trading company believed, that a Catholic Indian would be a better trade partner and would be a better military ally. Unlike the Spanish, these missionaries were rarely accompanied by soldiers. Whereas the Spanish crown sent soldiers to protect those Spanish missions, many of these Jesuit French missionaries went out into the wilderness entirely on their own. And unlike the Franciscans, who were the dominant monastic order in New Spain, the Jesuits, these French Jesuits, did not require the Indians to come to a structure that they built. They did not require the Indians to come to them. The Jesuit missionaries went out and lived among the Native Americans in their villages and with the Native Americans. New Orleans, we think of as a French settlement, and it was way down at the end of the Mississippi. However, it is slow to grow, but it is an important part of New France. You see, with Quebec in the north and New Orleans in the south, New France and the French government controls access to the interior of North America. If you want to get in from the south, you've got to go up the Mississippi River. If you want to get in from the north, you've got to come down the St. Lawrence Seaway. Any other method is going to require travel over land. And once you reach the Appalachian Mountains, that is pretty difficult. So if you want to get into that interior, the Great Lakes, the Midwest, what was at that time called the Northwest, you needed French approval. That's a big amount of land as well. New France there in tan is a large piece of land with a very widely dispersed population. Not nearly as many settlers as the English colonies. And remember, the French did not necessarily take the land. There's not a lot of settling on land. They're not building farms like their English neighbors are. This leads to fewer conflicts with the Indians, and it is a more homogeneous or more similar population in New France than the diversity that we'll see in the English colonies. Remember, no foreigners are allowed. In fact, only Catholic French settlers are allowed. This means that this population in New France is more unified and easier to mobilize for military action than some of the English colonies.